At the dawn of 1942, in the midst of the Second World War, 11,000 American troops were deployed to construct a supply route between Alaska and Canada. Among the 11,000 were 4,000 Black segregated soldiers. They were segregated to their own infantry and denied leadership roles because even in times of war, African Americans were considered to be less than second class. The task of the Black soldiers was to carve out a route from their point of origin in Alaska. Heading southward, they would cut a path through 2,000 kilometers of virgin wilderness, eventually meeting up with the white soldiers as they worked their way north from their point of origin in British Columbia. The supply route was the foundation of what we now know as the Alaska Highway. I cannot begin to imagine the scope of that task, clearing not just brush, but aged forest trees for 2,000 kilometers. In temperatures that dipped in the winter as low as minus 55 and then soared in the summer to over 30 degrees. But for these Black soldiers, the weather was not the only hardship. Of course, they had to contend with discrimination. They were strictly forbidden to enter the indigenous settlements in Alaska. They were forced to create their own shelters with the materials that were supplied. Of course, the white soldiers had no such restrictions. So 8 months of grueling physical labor was compounded by the blatant oppression of human rights. It wasn't until very recently that these 4,000 men received the credit that was due for the construction of this principal roadway. This chapter in the history of Black Americans was brought to my attention by my colleague, Charmaine Bailey. She's the minister at Trinity and Mount Zion United Churches in London. And Charmaine has a very vested interest in the history of Black people, as she originally hails from the Caribbean island of Antigua. Stories like these need to be told in order for us to appreciate the great contributions made by Black Canadians and Black Americans in forming the foundations of our country. And it's appropriate to note at this time the contribution of the Chinese Canadians, who in the 1880s were instrumental in building the Canadian Pacific Railway. They worked in incredibly difficult and often dangerous conditions. The lives of 600 Chinese Canadians were sacrificed in the construction of this railway. 4 men lost for every mile of track, and that's a very conservative estimate. When I considered these men, both the Chinese Canadians and the Black Americans, I might say that they were driven into the wilderness, either by a desperate need for work or because their status as soldiers required it. But what of those who travel to the wilderness of their own accord? What of those who seek the far reaches of places unknown, not because of necessity, but rather because of a deep spiritual need? This brings us to the scripture story. The story of Jesus in the wilderness is read the first Sunday in Lent every year. So this year we hear Mark's version. Now, St. Mark, as you remember, is always in a hurry. Everything for Mark happens in rapid succession. Jesus is baptized. Then, immediately, the Spirit drives him into the wilderness. It's an interesting choice of verb. The Spirit, the same Spirit who descends upon Jesus at the moment of his baptism, drives him into the wilderness. Not encourages him or invites him, but drives him. Here he stays for 40 days while he is tempted. He is with the wild beasts. as well as angels who wait upon him. For some reason, Mark doesn't think that the reader needs to know the details of Jesus' desert experience. Luke and Matthew, on the other hand, go into great details describing all the temptations to which Jesus is subjected. So was Mark just in a hurry to get on with the rest of the story? Or is this experience so sacred, so holy, that no words can describe it? The animals are present. What kind of animals are they? Are these animals hostile, or is Jesus at peace in their presence? And what about these angels? How did they minister to Jesus? Now, wilderness, the word wilderness in Greek is eremos. It's not necessarily a desert, but a place that is uninhabitable. So what is the purpose of an extended stay in an inhospitable environment? How can it possibly benefit Jesus? Is this experience of Jesus perhaps akin to a vision quest, like that of our indigenous brothers and sisters? If the wilderness experience is the blueprint for Lent, a time of testing and deprivation, how is it meant to benefit us, to enrich our spiritual diet? And who in their right mind picks up a map, points at the spot named wilderness, and says, let's drive there? It's really the sort of place one finds by accident and is in a hurry to escape. But what if the wilderness is not so much a place of desolation as it is a place to clear our heads? And what if no one has driven us there, but rather we allow ourselves to be drawn? What if the Spirit is inviting us into the wilderness, drawing us there for the sake of our spiritual health? It's a time and a place where we can reconfigure, reevaluate, reprioritize. Ask ourselves those questions we're either too busy to ask at other times, or are so weighty that they've just sunk to the depths of our consciousness, waiting to be unveiled. This time of spiritual wrestling is a lot like physical exercise. We can make lots of excuses not to do it, but in the end, the exercise is exactly what we need. Once a week, I go swimming at the local community center. But in the hour before I leave the house, there's often a conversation that goes on inside my head. And one voice belongs to the better version of Anne, and the other voice belongs to the lesser version of Anne. And the lesser version says, oh, I don't know, it's cold out. And the better version says, Anne, it's only -2. And the lesser version says, but I have to drive there. And the better version says, Anne, it's 8 minutes in a warm car. And then the voice says, oh, but the water is cold. Anne, it's above 80 degrees. So you'll be glad to know that every week, the better version wins. Wow, I go swimming once a week. I think Pauline does better than that. Anyway, so finally, the better version drags Anne, the lesser version, into the car, into the community center, and into the pool. And as soon as I hit the water, I know this is exactly where I need to be. Not only need to be, but want to be. Those muscles that I've neglected the last few days are finally getting the stretch that they need. Side stroke, front crawl, back crawl. And when it's all finished, I realize that never in my life have I said to myself, I should not have gone swimming today. That was a bad idea. Spiritual exercise, just like physical exercise, requires discipline. And as Wib stated so beautifully in the video, the Spirit invites us into the wilderness to confront our weaknesses, to face the mirages of our distractions. Dare we ask ourselves the difficult questions? What are my distractions? What draws me away from God? What are my core values? Do I live my life on a day-to-day basis in a way that reflects those values? And what about my wallet? Does my spending reflect my stated priorities? What are the grudges that I harbor? Is my dislike of an individual or group of people just a manifestation of my prejudice? How do I interact with those whose beliefs, whose values, whose sexual orientation is different from mine? How hard do I work to find some common ground? And most importantly, am I able to see the face of Christ in others? Are others able to see the face of Christ in me? The questions are myriad, and our better selves require honest answers. For in truth, our deepest desire is to walk more closely with God. Friends, this Lenten season, let us follow the Spirit's lead and take a cruise around the wilderness. It won't be an easy drive, but it will take us where we need to go. When we reach down deep and wrestle with honesty and courage, there is hope for transformation. And in the company of Jesus, we will shine. May it be so.